So, Jujutsu Kaisen has finally come to an end, and I, as a longtime fan of the series, could not possibly be more fucking pissed. Oh my god, bro, I, as a fan of the series, who was convinced that this would go down as one of the greatest manga of all time, was shocked to my core when the announcement that the series would be ending in 5 chapters came out. And despite all of that, I still had faith that Gege would somehow manage to wrap things up nicely and cleanly. And my god, I was wrong. The ending to this manga is horrifyingly terrible, beyond disappointing, as it fails to even be somewhat of a satisfying ending to a manga with millions of fans all across the globe. I'm going to go over the last 3 chapters, which form the conclusion of the story, and give my thoughts on each one and explain why I think that the ending to JJK could possibly be the worst ending in manga history. Chapter 269 starts with a shot of a building. An ultra sauce packet is thrown on the ground, and we see Mei looking at an old woman. Maki is screaming at a nervous Yuta before the main trio walks in. Kusakabe assures them that they do not need to apologize for anything that's happened so far. We get some insight on how he returned to his original body after getting KO'd in Gojo's body. My ears burn! Maki starts scolding him like a literal child and talks about how they should have done the plan differently. And I must say, I despise how Gege decides to give us critical pieces of information after everything has happened, but let's move on. Todo explains why her plan is stupid as fuck. They keep discussing that, and all the characters just become racist out of nowhere. Then Maki engages in some light domestic violence while Yuji tries to calm her down. We learn another critical piece of information that comes out of nowhere, that being that people are able to be stored inside of Rika, which was never revealed before. Useless number 1 spouts some useless dialogue while useless number 2 does the same thing, and Wee loudly declares himself the MVP in an attempt to gain the approval of others in order to cope with the sexual abuse he regularly endures from his older sister. Epstein's daughter takes a seat, and they begin to discuss the new shadow style and how joining a binding vow is required in order to use the new shadow style simple domain. They go on to explain how the new shadow style has a head, and anyone wanting to learn this technique must be a disciple of this mysterious leader. And the head of the new shadow style seems to absorb the lifespan of their disciples. A lot of the other details are not known. And out of nowhere, Kusakabe is revealed to be the leader of the new shadow style, and he has gotten rid of the lifespan spell. And Mei continues to groom and manipulate her younger brother for her own profit. We need to get him away from her, so I can take his place. We cut back to Mei and the old lady, who is the former leader of the new shadow style, who questions how Mei found her. She answers and reveals the old woman's plan to gather more disciples and become an equal to the big 3 families and seize control of the Jujutsu world. She talks about how absorbing lifespans was used by the former leader to live long enough to someday see something of importance. And in the event that the Kama and the Gojo clans fell in the final battle, the new shadow style would be able to achieve their end goal. What's more important than money can't be controlled without money. If there wasn't exclusive control of simple domain, some sorcerers wouldn't have had to die. You were trying to make my little brother defective, so this was bound to happen. Chapter 269 is great, and personally I found it really enjoyable. Apart from the back and forth bickering of Maki and the others, I found Mei, Kusakabe, Wee, and the conversation between Mei and the old woman to be very enjoyable. But still, I can't help but feel as though everything that happened here was unnecessary and could have been time more well spent on flashbacks for important characters rather than explaining the origins of that one anti-domain technique that got used a couple of times. Chapter 270 starts with Megumi and Shoko burying Tsumiki. Fushiguro gets a call telling him to go somewhere. Tengen's absorbed vestiges were left in Sukuna's remains, which were stripped from Fushiguro. We cut to Utahime and Todo's twin. They're discussing how Sukuna's remains will allow Tengen's barrier to remain active, while Gakuganji reassures them that things will be alright. Maki hands one of the 2 sumo guys in the cutting games a katana and tells him that the cutting games has essentially come to an end, and that the players will soon become a topic of discussion. She continues to explain that they will need to recover the players that were abducted by the Americans, and that Tokyo is the only place where cursed spirits are appearing. And the sumo guys seem rather enthusiastic about this. We cut to the manga author guy, Charles Bernard, and he is talking to this other guy about like printing paper and printing manga pages or whatever. We then cut to another irrelevant character that no one likes, Takaba, and he is speaking to a faceless character that looks suspiciously similar to Ghetto about party jokes. We cut to another set of irrelevant characters, and one is apologizing to the other for some fucking reason, and that's pretty much the whole interaction. Higuruma is talking to fucking somebody.
Who the fuck is this nigga?
They're having an irrelevant conversation that doesn't seem to actually mean much. Finally, we got some actually relevant characters. Angel tells Hana that Megami's memories have been restored, and Megami is looking even more emo than usual. He says he'll take responsibility for what Sukuna did and offers to become her right arm. And she misinterprets this as a marriage proposal. And for the fourth fucking time now, we cut to another set of irrelevant characters. Mind you, this is the second to last chapter of this manga. This random woman walks into her home, talking to this other character, who seems to be an overgrown Dr. Cockroach. The main trio is now talking to them. We find out only the girlfriend sees him with those giant eyes, and Nobara takes her to another room to examine her body. Megami and Yuji theorize on what it could be, and Megami comes to the conclusion that it's a cursed user, most likely from the Culling games. Chapter 270 is horrible, constantly taking up valuable time in the second to last chapter of the entire manga to update us on irrelevant characters, having a bunch of pointless conversations, and worst of all, it ends with the main trio investigating a pointless little curse user who's just causing some light trouble to some random people. And at this point in the story, 2 out of the main trio can cast a domain expansion, the peak of Jujutsu sorcery. This would make Megami and Yuji some of the strongest characters in the series. So why did they feel the need to send all 3 of them to investigate some small curse user? Gege chooses not to focus on important backstories or giving us greater insight into the 2 remaining Jujutsu families, which we've never seen, not showing us anything from the golden age of Jujutsu sorcery, which is constantly brought up throughout the whole series, and we know very little about it. Instead of focusing on these actually important things, we get 3 of the strongest characters in the series investigating Dr. Cockroach. Chapter 271 is the final chapter in the Jujutsu Kaisen manga, the one that will conclude the entire series. So let's hope that it actually covers some important topics. We start off with a beautiful color page with all the characters, and unfortunately for us, this is one of the very few good things in this chapter. Nobara tells the others that after a while of feeling up this girl, she didn't find anything. They deduce that the curse user's ability has a range of around 50 to about 100 meters, and they start brainstorming ideas to catch the curse user with a cute bit of banter between the trio. Megami comes up with his own plan, which sounds exactly like what they were just recommending, but let's ignore that. He plans to head to the top of a large condo, finding a lookout point and waiting for the technique to deactivate and then reactivate. They climb up to the top floor, and the technique deactivates. At that very moment, the main trio spots the curse user. Then Kugisaki jumps off the top floor of this building, catches herself with a tiny claw hammer. Look at the damage to the building. What is that thing made of? They land and stand across from the curse user, and his technique turns them into like these fucking Goombas. He tries to run and gets captured by Megami's pet werewolf. They ask the woman if she's ever seen him before, and she says no. This causes the guy to absolutely lose his shit. He starts raging. We find out that the girl is a hostess, and the guy spent 1 million yen on her and bought her that bag. And to be honest, I kinda see why he was mad, but at the same time, why would you spend so much money on a hostess? So this whole situation is really just his fault for being a simp. After all the irrelevant bullshit, we finally cut to something worthwhile. Gojo. Yuji is talking to him about doing switch training with him. He reluctantly agrees and tells Yuji to be more forward thinking. He tells Yuji how he wants his students to grow even further than he ever did. He says he hopes that his students will grow strong and forget about him. Yuji reassures him that they could never forget about him, and comments that he seems a bit out of character. Gojo laughs off this brief moment of vulnerability, saying this is more confidence than he has ever had, and he reassures Yuji that he's expecting great things from him. Yuji says the same line to the kid afterwards. Him and Megami have a short conversation, and we cut to Sukuna speaking with Mahito in the border to the afterlife, the path where souls walk on their way down the cycle. Mahito accuses Sukuna of not living according to his own stature, saying he wanted revenge against those who cursed him. He tells Mahito that he lived the only way he knew how. He then corrects himself and says he actually had two paths. And yet, I couldn't help but spit out the curses stirring deep within my viscera. I feared my own curse would immolate me. Should there be a next time, perhaps it would be nice to walk a different path. Mahito, being the child that he is, loses his temper and accuses Sukuna of being soft. He replies, "Obviously, I lost after all." Mahito continues flailing around like an idiot, and we see the main cast walking happily. Apart from Megami, he's still emo as hell. Before cutting to a familiar box, its doors slowly creak open, and within it is Sukuna's final finger. And that's it. That's the final chapter of Jujutsu Kaisen. And I must say, I have never been more disappointed in my entire life. Half of the final chapter is concluding a pointless investigation about some hostess and her stalker. Seeing Sukuna's growth was nice, and Gojo's brief conversation with Yuji that shows a very rare but very needed moment of vulnerability from him was also a very nice addition. And that's about it. Absolutely nothing else is interesting. And this is overall a terrible conclusion that leaves so many questions in the story unanswered. One question that I always wanted answered was how exactly Kenjaku even set up the culling games. We learned that he made up a bunch of binding vows, but we never actually learned what those are. And from his fights, it doesn't seem like he has any restrictions on his abilities. So what exactly did he give up in order to be able to set up such a massive, large-scale event? After that, we only get brief mentions of what happened to the culling games, no high and air flashback, which again was the golden age of sorcery, and we never even see what happened during that time. We also never get a flashback of Sukuna, who is the main villain of the whole story, and we only get brief mentions of what his backstory is, even just an explanation of what he himself is. Like, we have no idea why this guy has 2 mouths and 4 arms, and we're supposed to just accept that and move on. But the main thing that makes the ending to this manga so horrifyingly terrible is that it is boring as all hell. Like, my god, yes, this is a conclusion, so anyone expecting a bunch of action and tense, fast-paced scenes is an idiot. But you know what's crazy? That the conclusion of JJK has a bunch of action in it. Okay, weird, but not terrible. I mean, JJK is a shonen, so action is kind of the main thing. But it is well known in writing that the best fights are the ones that carry emotional impact, where we know all the characters and their motivations and why they're fighting. Cool. But for some godforsaken reason, Gege Akutami decides to have this random, action encounter that revolves around a bunch of characters that we do not know or care about. So that in and of itself makes this conclusion worse than it would have been if he just didn't add these. Like, this ending would have been much better if he took the Sukuna scene and the Gojo scene and just made them longer. That would have made this whole thing immediately better for no effort. And why would you introduce a bunch of nameless characters that we don't know or care about in the last 2 chapters? In the final chapter, you would think, okay, let's just wrap up everything, right? We're not adding anything new unless it's something that we've been building towards the entire time. Let's just wrap everything up and, allow fans to feel satisfied with an ending that answers most of or all of the questions that the story has left. But no, Gege says fuck that and just decides to force him into an entirely pointless investigation carried out by the main trio, where they are searching for a nameless curse user, and he's got this curse technique that literally just makes people within a certain distance look weird. And that's all that it does. I am beyond disappointed. And that's pretty much it.